Hey everybody, this is Khara Crossway Brindle back on another video. I have a special guest with us today. I have Kyla with us, and we are here to talk about client retention, which once you hear what Kyla has to say, you'll understand why I asked them to come on, because there's some things that work really well, and we have an awesome little acronym. So Kyla, you want to tell people more about yourself to start?
Sure. My name is Kyla Jones. I am the owner of Equilibrium Counseling, a group practice in Centennial. And we specialize in working with youth with trauma and with the LGBTQIA community.
So
I think that's
valuable. Yes. Yeah. So because you work with such specific populations, I think this is even more remarkable. And I know that offline we've talked, and I think the audience needs to know this of like, I begged you to come on and talk about this. It's a little out of your comfort zone, but it's so amazing. So we need to talk about it. But because you have such specific populations, I think that's really telling to the fact that the strategy you use works, right? So in your own words, you had said something like, I have really good client retention. And that was from a humble place where you're like, this, it just works. People want to, get from that consult call to working
Mhm.
with you. And so I think there's something that our audience wants to know about that, considering they're all mental health professionals.
Sure.
So to
Yeah.
get into it, when I was listening to you talk to me about this in a consultation, we started coming up with like kind of the four pieces that support client retention. The first of which is A for authenticity. You want to speak to what that looks like?
Yeah. It feels very important to me that folks know what they're getting into, right? We're building a relationship and a relationship that's really intimate. And so knowing right off the bat who they're working with is really important. So in that first call, in my first emails, they're gonna get a sense of who I am, right? And that sometimes includes me cursing. I definitely have a mouth on me, and so sometimes those slip out, but that's gonna happen in the room too. And so being just showing up, having my big laugh, being really me is important because I don't want folks to feel confused when they meet me in the room that this is a different person than they talk to on the phone. And so it
Yeah.
feels really important that we are showing up fully, whatever that looks like, because
Mhm.
who we are is going to be in the room fully. And having those two things match is a really important part of building trust, which ultimately is the basis of what we're doing anyway.
Yeah, definitely. As mental health professionals, absolutely. And I imagine if there is some reason for things not to feel congruent from the phone call to the face-to-face meeting, as just one example, it's probably worth naming. So like I had in my head the situation of like maybe your voice is hoarse because you've just gotten over a cold or something. So like I think that'd be worth naming in a consult call of like, hey, forgive me, I'm going to sound a little different because I'm getting over illness, but I'm happy to talk to you and look forward to making this connection, right? Like I feel like that's relatively effortless to just name if there's
Yes.
something going on that wouldn't look the same in a
Right.
face-to-face meeting or telehealth or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, for me, there's like the things that are important to me are also going to come through. Like I make sure people know where parking is because parking is important to me. And so those are things that I'm going to lay out much more fully than some other folks. And even those pieces are the authentic parts of
Mhm.
like, hey, I don't like getting lost, and so I'm going to make an extra effort to help you know this. And I'll probably name that in that call too, that
Right.
like you can expect to see this, and so know that that's coming. Um, and if you haven't heard from me, you might want to do X, Y, or Z because you've heard that I said that I am going to call you, right? And so if I haven't, then something probably happened. Like those pieces of
Mhm.
authenticity of just like being really clear are also important.
Yeah. And I imagine just from the parking example, it also indicates a level of caring where you're like really thinking about them and their experience. And I think that also probably contributes to client retention of like, oh, you give a shit about me, right? Speaking of cussing, right? Or like, oh, this
Right.
feels good. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's A for our ABCD acronym. B
Yes.
is boundaries, which obviously is a buzzword in therapy. So what do you mean by boundaries for client retention?
Yeah. So for me, the boundary piece is being really clear. What do I have available? Right. I'm not going to offer clients a scheduling time that I don't have available. Or I just saw your scarcity video and it reminded me, like, I'm not going to offer somebody a time that I'm going to feel resentful about.
Right.
Right. And so for me, boundaries are really about, for me, being clear of like, what do I have to offer? How can I name that specifically? Right? How can I show caring, but also let you know that like our time is limited.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to make sure that we can work together. And if we can't schedule wise, that also feels really important. We're not going to meet if we can't make a schedule work.
Right.
So I'm really clear about what do I have in the future available. And but also like the boundary piece also feels like me being clear about what I work with, what I know well, what are my niches, and letting folks know if in that conversation this is not in my wheelhouse, I'm also going to name that. Right? That's a boundary. I'm not going to take somebody that I'm not going to serve well,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that there's
Yeah.
tons of other therapists in the space and we'll find the right fit for them, right? I want to make sure that folks get what they need
Mm-hmm.
versus trying to fill spaces.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. This is all coming from the framework of a first meeting or first consultation call, right? To be like, am I a fit? Do we mesh? Do I have the specialties you need? Can I support the goals you're setting for yourself and coming to therapy? Right. So I
Mhm.
think of boundaries also as like I've had potential clients ask about what does it look like to reach you out of hours or what are your hours you're in the office. Um, I've had people say, can I shoot you an email if I have an aha moment? Can I leave a voicemail just processing my thoughts with no expectation that you're going to call me back? Like, is that something you're okay with? So I can see this being like that dynamic where you're also like trying to figure out what the client's expectations might be of us as professional and like what we're willing and unwilling to do. What are your thoughts?
Sure. I think letting people know as much as possible is really important, right? And some folks don't even know, they don't know what they don't know, right? They don't know what questions to ask, especially first time folks that are coming in
Mm-hmm.
and are having this conversation. Um, it feels important to be able to put those things out, um, to be clear and to say like, yes, I am available between these hours. You are more than welcome to email me. I will not answer, after 6 o'clock when I'm out of the office. I am really clear with my boundaries. I don't work on the weekends. I I don't work after 6. I have a family, and so that feels really important to keep separate time. And I let people know that's a part of what's happening for me, but that they are always welcome to reach out. Right. So sometimes I actually have folks they'll just send me commitments, right? If they're working on accountability for themselves, they'll send me an email and say, I'm committing to this. And then I get it in the morning and I sometimes respond with woohoo, right? Or like, great, let's talk about it next time. So yes, I think letting people know what to expect from us when they're going to hear from us, those things are helpful because it reduces the anxiety that folks are
Right.
holding.
Definitely. Yeah, which I think segues into our C of this acronym, this ABCD acronym, which has two parts, confidence and connection. And I know you wanted to emphasize both of these as part of what creates client retention, because I think they're both probably equally important.
Yeah. So I think one of the things, being very specific about who we work with, allows, I think, for both of these things to happen fairly easily, right? Because I work with the same types of things over and over again, I have a lot of confidence about the work that I do, right? Like I know what to expect. I know what my skills are that are going to benefit those people. And so when I'm talking to people for that first time, right, it's so vulnerable to make that phone call. Um, I'm really looking for opportunities to connect. People want to be heard, they want to be seen. And so as we're listening, I don't know about you, but I usually ask like, okay, so give me the general pieces of why you're reaching out today, right? In that first phone call. And the things that people decide to share, knowing that we're strangers, right? Like generally we're on the phone, so we're not even seeing people, right? So like for me, really holding the honor of somebody sharing. But I'm looking for ways to help validate that I understand where they're coming from,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that takes both the confidence piece of like, oh yeah, I can quickly identify these things that I regularly hear, right? And also offer these questions or connection points or compassion points to say like, yeah, we don't have to go into the details because I know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I can do that by the questions that I ask. I could do that by naming um, a pain point that most likely is present, even if they haven't named it yet,
Right.
or a thought that might be present. Uh, so those are the things that I'm doing pretty quickly to establish I get this. And
Mm-hmm.
and if I'm struggling to do that, then it's probably actually also a really important piece of, is this person a good fit for me?
Right.
Right. And so it becomes a way to also identify fit for both
Yeah.
of us.
Absolutely. Well, because I'm thinking of confidence in ourselves. If I can help you and I have the skills and I feel like I can work well with you, which I'm hearing you say in your description, but also confidence from the client of like, oh, I feel like you get me, you're hearing me, you're
Mhm.
telling me that you're kind of validating or reassuring me that like what I'm coming in to do work around is possible, right? So like I see that confidence on both sides of the way we respond of like, yep, makes sense, totally can work with that, happy to work with you or excited to work with you because I have this skill set. Like I can imagine that being very affirming to the client too and build
Mhm.
confidence in them that they've made the right outreach if this was a vulnerable call to make.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
definitely, I think it's an important piece that we're both feeling like, oh, this is okay. This feels good,
Yeah.
right? And it's just a phone call, right? It doesn't obligate us to anything else, but I think just having that landing place that feels comfortable is such a huge part of the how do we now build this relationship? And doing that from that first call is incredibly important.
Right. Right. Which segues into our last part of the acronym, which is D. And the D stands for being directive, but also providing direction. So I can see both of those applying just from my own definition in my head. But what would you tell our viewers about direction versus being directive?
Yeah. Well, I think my personality tends to be pretty direct, right? We have very little time. Generally, these phone calls 15-20 minutes,
Right.
right? So we're packing kind of a lot into a very little time. And and so being direct is important. And that includes one of the things that I am very direct about is that I I know that there is a point where I am going to upset this person. If we
Mm,
work together, I am going to hit a button at some point that's tender. And because I work really hard to hold the line between support and challenge.
mm,
So we're going to build lots of rapport and lots of safety, but I'm also going to poke, right? So those are both happening. And so there's going to be a point where I hit something tender, and it feels really important to me that even if that happens, we can still stay in relationship,
mhm.
right? And wanting that to be named directly upfront because I know it's going to happen. And
Yes.
and and that people feel comfortable signing up for that, right? Because that's just a part of what's going to happen. So I'm very direct about like, hey, I know this is going to happen, and how are we going to work with it,
Mhm.
right? So that piece feels important. Right? These are the things I know. Um, Here are the ways that I work, right? So giving some information, but also, you know, especially people who have never done therapy before don't necessarily know what are next steps, what is the process, how do we do this?
Right.
And so it's also talking through, okay, we have this phone call. Next steps would be, you can set up an actual appointment, or right now, and we can do that on the phone, or you can do that through my scheduler, or you can take some time and think about it and then X, Y, or Z. And if you don't ever want to talk to me again, we'll find you referrals, right? There's plenty of people who might be a good fit, but talking people through those next pieces feels important, so that the anxiety of next steps, the anxiety of waiting gets reduced, right? So you can expect that you're going to get an email from me that gets you into the portal so you can sign documents, right? If it's not in your regular email, check your spam, right? So those things that also feel important in terms of helping people feel held, both in the emotional sense, but also in the like logistics of like, I don't know what to do here, right?
Yeah.
And wanting people to know that I've thought through those things and I'm providing them so that they don't have to worry. Right?
Yeah.
And
I think
it's
that's so
always
important. Sorry, for the professional side, right? Of like, they're making this call to a professional. And so I think there's some assumptions of like, I do expect you to drive. I do expect you to tell me what next steps are, of like, are you taking me as a client? Am I signing paperwork? So am I asked to think about it? What is that next step? And so I really appreciate that you've made that distinction, because I think there are plenty of colleagues who, in an effort to be warm, might just kind of wishy-washy of like, oh, just whatever you decide. And then the clients felt like they're left with, well, I made this phone call. I made that hard effort. Like, what are you going to do?
right. Right. We're trying to be accommodating, right? By not imposing.
Right.
But I think naming what the options are allows them to choose without feeling just like left to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
I think for me, one of those pieces is, because of the populations I work with, and I'm sure this is true for all of us, but consent is incredibly important for me, right? So I will always say, look, if after that first meeting, if this is not a good fit, like you don't have to reach out to me again, right? Like, or, we can find you somebody else, but those things, because not everybody knows that they can therapist shop, right? And they've, especially our people pleasers, get really caught and then aren't happy. And so being really clear and direct about those things just creates more and more permission, right? And that feels really important.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that we're having this conversation, because I feel like it's validating some of the things that clinicians are doing really well. And it's probably giving them some possibilities of where they might dial it up a little or change something to be most effective in this first impression that we're making on a consult call or the first meeting. So for viewers, again, your acronym is A for authenticity, B for boundaries, C for confidence, and connection. See, I had to look at that. D for being directive and providing direction, so that that consult call feels worthwhile to the client or potential client, of like, I made this effort. I went out of my comfort zone to make the call, or I'm feeling like I need some support. And then there's some direction of those next steps. So Kyla, I completely understand why people have felt this retention and this warmth from you, because this makes complete sense to me, both from a logical place, but also a relational place, this acronym and these pieces you've talked about today. So thank you for being willing to come on a video and talk about it, because I know you're like, oh, I don't know about this. But I know that all of our colleagues will really appreciate just having this distinct list of things to consider when they're making that first touch with a client and having that first contact. Any final thoughts for our viewers on this?
No, I don't think so. I just feel excited for people finding the right fit, right? So whoever that is, and that feels really important, that we're all getting what we need in these relationships. So
Absolutely. Well, that's the beauty of these videos, is that anyone who watches them could be a client or a professional, right? So they could be like, all right, I'm going to have this in the back of my mind next time I outreach somebody or make that connection. So again, really appreciate you, and viewers, stay tuned for more videos. We'll see you next time.